So let's take a minute and look at the Linux file system. Now, first thing we need to know is that the Linux file system structures things differently than the Windows file system does. So in Windows, each separate drive or volume is going to have a different drive letter assigned. So I might have a C drive, which might be my local hard drive. I might have a D drive, which might be my CD-ROM drive. I might have an E drive, which would be a flash drive. I may even create another hard drive, or install another hard drive, or create another volume, which is going to have another drive letter. And so I have to remember what drive letter things are on, and I need to go to those particular drive letters. Okay, Linux doesn't use drive letters, and it keeps everything tied into one file system. So I'm going to start by doing cd / space / All right, / is the root of the Linux file system. So at this point, I am in that root or that base of the file system. And then everything is tied into here in different folders. Now I can explore those folders doing ls-l. And if you just do an ls, it will show you the names of everything, but no other information. If I do ls-l, it'll list the information out and it'll give me more detail. Now, we've already taken a look at some of this. In a previous video when we were talking about permissions, we talked about how these first 10 characters indicate what type of object it is. D for directory, dash for file. We're seeing something else now here at L. That's going to be a link. And then the next 9 are RWX, 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 or dash instead of one of those characters, which indicate permissions for the owning user, the owning group, and everybody else. So we move over, we see root, identicate the first root, indicating, let's get an appropriate word here, indicating the owning user, and the second one, the owning group. And then you'll see the size, the last data was modified, and then you'll see what the actual name of it is. So this one right here is a file, swap.img. This is a directory, OPT. This is a link. Let's take a look at this one up here, bin, which redirects to user bin. Okay, now at this point I have very, very little on this system. So we have basically a base install of Ubuntu Server. So let's talk about what some of these folders are. There's some pretty important ones here. Dev holds information about our different devices. Proc holds information about our processor. Only going to deal with those if I'm trying to get information about my devices or trying to manipulate my devices. We have etc. Now this is where it starts getting interesting. etc holds our system-wide application configuration files. So I'm going to do cd etc here, ls-l, and we're going to see a bunch of configuration files. And then we're also going to see folders with more configuration files underneath them. So basically, if there is a configuration file that impacts the entire system, it's almost always going to be in the etc folder. Now, at this point, I want to stop and show you one other thing real quick. If you look at our prompt down here, you're going to see the way the prompt is structured. Username at machine name, colon, and then it's going to show you your current location, /etc. Now, not all distributions use that same prompt. In fact, there are actually ways you can modify that prompt. If you do, you can always, or if you're on a distro that doesn't have that, you can always type pwd, which is print working directory, and it will show you your location in the file system. Now, while we're talking about this, then we'll get back to our other folders here in a minute. While we're talking about this, something else you need to know is there is a shortcut in Ubuntu Server. It's the tilde, which takes you to your home directory. So my home directory is home / home / David, because that's who I'm logged in as. But now my prompt doesn't tell me that, it just says tilde. And that's because that's just a shortcut for / home / David. And you just saw how I used it, cd tilde, and it takes me to my home directory. Okay, back to where we were at. Clear this, ls-l. Okay, the etc. holds all of our configuration files. The home directory holds all of our home folders. So every user is going to have a home folder. You can also create home folders for groups or whatever else you want. But that's the default location for all of your users' home folders, except for one. The root user does not have a directory in home. In fact, let's do cd home ls-l, and you'll see I've got two users. And then I actually created this one here when we were playing around with some security permissions in a previous video. But you'll notice there's no root here. So the reason is cd period always takes you back up one level. ls-l shows us that we have right here a root directory, and that is a home folder for the root user. Okay. We talked about how everything is in the Linux file system shows up in that same root file system. So I never change drive letters. If I want to go to a different drive or a different volume, I'll use cd and then go to wherever that is mounted. We're going to talk more about mounting things a little bit later on. But I want to show you two folders here, media and mnt. Now, these are default directories that are created for you to mount things into. You don't have to mount them here. You can mount them somewhere else, but they're created for you to be able to use that. Media is made for you to, it's a default mount location for removable storage, like a flash drive. So if you put in a flash drive and it auto mounts, or you manually mount it, you can mount it into that media folder. And then to access it, you just type cd/media, or from here, I can skip the / and just type media. But that takes me into that media folder. And then if I would have had something mounted here, I'd see it. MNT is the same thing, except it's designed for things that are going to be mounted for longer term than just removable storage. So you attach a hard drive there you're going to have for a couple of weeks. That might be a good spot to put it. Or you can mount it somewhere else if you need to, but that's what that media and the MNT folders are for. The OPT is for storing optional software packages. Some programs will install there. Most of them, frankly, are going to install into the bin folder, which, as we saw here, is redirected to user bin. So we already talked about proc root snap is where snap packages are going to install. The other two that we want to point out is going to be the user file or the user folder and the var folder. The user is where we're going to store a lot of user files. Now, when we're talking user files, we're not talking about user data files. Those are stored in the home directory typically. So in user bin is going to be the majority of the user commands. In user lib is going to be the user libraries. So that's where a lot of our software applications, our packages are actually going to install. The var folder is going to be where we store a lot of our log files. In fact, let's go there for a minute. Let's go cd var lsl, and you'll see we have a bunch of different folders here. Let's go to the log folder, cd log lsl, and here's going to be a bunch of our logs. And you'll see a bunch of other things that we're using there too. So mail, spool files, things like that. Okay. Now let's go back to our home directory, and I want to show you just a couple of other things real quick. So cd tilde takes me back to my home directory. pwd shows yes, I am indeed in my home directory. Okay. So we're going to talk more about managing and manipulating the file system a little bit later on, but just as a real quick intro, I currently have nothing in my folder. Now, there are different ways that I can create a file. We'll talk about them more later. I want to introduce one command that we'll use sometimes when we're doing testing, and the command is touch. So the idea of touch is that it updates the date and timestamp on a file. So you can touch that file to show that it's been used recently. So if you try to touch a file that doesn't exist, and LSL said I had nothing in here, so I'm going to touch sample.txt. What that does is that creates an empty folder or an empty file, get it right, with that particular name. So now I have LSL shows me I have a file there. So that'll allow me to create a file. That's an empty file. There are other ways to create files directly. You've got text editors. You can open up a text editor, put some content in, save a file. In fact, now that I have this file here, I can open it up with a text editor, modify it, and save the data. I can create a folder using the command mkdir. So I'm going to make a directory named test. And now if I do an lsl, you'll see that we have sample.txt and test. Now let's say I want to remove a file. I'm going to rm is for remove, sample.txt, and that will take that file away. Let me go into let me do this. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go into my test folder. I'm going to create another file. So I'm going to use touch sample.txt. And then LSL, we'll see that we have a file there. I'm going to cd period to take me back to right here, my home directory. Oops. LSL. Okay. Now I have this folder that has a file in it. I'm going to create a new one too, mkdir test2. And LSL, we'll see that now we have test and test2. Now I want to take out test2, clear my screen here. And so I'm going to do rm test2. Now, rm doesn't want to remove, it'll remove a file, but it doesn't want to remove the directory, and so it creates this error. Now, there is a way to get around that. rm-r is a recursive delete. So that will remove files and directories. So I'm going to remove test2, and now you can see it took it out. Now, you need to be careful with rm-r because it will remove files and directories and anything that's involved. So remember, let me do an ls for test, and by doing it this way, do ls-l. So what I'm saying is give me a directory listing, make it a long listing, but every time you see me run ls so far, it's been without another name. So it looks in that specific folder, wherever I'm at. This is saying, look in the test folder and show me what's in the test folder. And you'll see sample.txt. By the way, I can do this anywhere. So I can do an ls-l, show me the contents of /etc. And it will show you the contents of the /etc folder, even though you'll see with my tilde and with my print working directory, I'm still in my home folder. Okay. So I want to remove test. So I'm going to do rm-r test. And it does it immediately. Now notice there was no confirmation. It doesn't say, hey, by the way, just so you know, you're going to remove the test folder and every single file and subfolder that's in it. It doesn't do that. It just says, yep, sure enough, I'll do it. And it takes it all out. This can be really dangerous. Let's say that I'm going to do a sudo su. So I'm going to switch to my root user. Now, let's say I forgot that I was in my root user and I meant to do rm-r/home/sam. I'm going to take out Sam's folder. But let's say I accidentally typoed it and did this. What'll happen is it'll issue the rm-r. By the way, if you are following along, do not hit enter at the moment. What it'll do is it'll take the rm-r and it'll say remove recursively, starting with the home directory, everything. And it's a really good way to trash your system in a hurry, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that Ubuntu makes it so that you always start out without those elevated permissions. If you try it here, you won't be able to delete anything you don't have permission. You can still kind of screw up a system pretty bad doing that. But if you do it in the wrong account with elevated permissions, you can completely destroy a system very quickly. So, just a little word of caution there. Okay, so at this point, hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of some essential commands. So the ls, the cd, the print working directory, that will allow you to navigate and explore the Linux file system.